Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and it is time, no, it is beyond time for me to play with some powdered food coloring to dye yarn. Wait, Rebecca, you use Kool-Aid all the time. Yes, Kool-Aid is technically a powder. There's powder food coloring, but I think the food coloring is actually a minor ingredient there. There's citric acid and flavors, and so ultimately you might not get a very vibrant color. You might need to use many packets. And because of the citric acid mixed with the powder, you get really great sharp speckles, which is wonderful. But I believe that you could do something very similar starting with powdered food coloring. So what is powdered food coloring for? These powders are intended to use in dry mixes and chocolates and candies and other places where you don't want to add water, but you want to add some color. The packages even contain a warning and say to use sparingly as the powdered colors are extremely concentrated and may stain clothing, hands, or mouth. All of the food coloring contains lake food coloring, so blue 1, yellow 5, yellow 6 lake, except for the purple, which has carmine, which is otherwise known as cochineal extract, which is a pigment that is from ground up bugs. It is approved for food, but this is also a well-known dye for natural dyes for a red color. And I don't think I've actually ever used it for dyeing yarn before. So I'm really excited to see what this color creates. As I'm opening up all the packages, I am reminded that technically I've used another form of powdered food coloring in the Wilton Color Dust, but that is something that I believe is not super concentrated either and has probably been cut because it's made as sort of a finish for baked goods versus as a food coloring to mix into your icings or batters or things like that. And so that's sort of how I'm differentiating this product as well, because I'm expecting that these will provide a little bit of a bang on our yarn. Today we are going to use these food coloring to dye 100 grams of Knit Picks Stroll figurine weight yarn. This yarn is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. I use it a lot. If you would like to learn more about any of the materials or equipment that I'm using in this video, you can find affiliate links to Knit Picks and Amazon in the video description. I will pre-soak the yarn for at least 20 minutes in some plain tap water. Before going straight to trying to speckle with this, I think I want to try swatching it a little bit, like I've done in some non-Dyepot weekly videos. But I want to see how all 7 colors look on this yarn. We might get some speckles and some variegation, but yeah, I think it'll be fun. So far, I have my 100 gram skein like super saturated in here. And now I'm adding 4 cups of water with 2 tablespoons of white vinegar. And I'm gonna start heating. I'm on my gas stove, and this sort of catering steam pan is across 2 burners. And I am going to spread things out. So we're not, the immersion could be lower here. Some of the dye will definitely hit the water first, but I think once we are hot, we will start adding just a little bit of dye in various spots around here. I pre-removed all of the seals on these containers, but now I'm going to take just a tiny bit on a fork of this black, just sort of place it on and see what happens. And doing it this way means I don't need to wash my hands in between each color. Now the purple, the lid looks like about the color of my gloves, but the color that I see of the powder looks a lot more burgundy. And actually, using the spoon like that and sort of just tapping the color off the spoon is really, really pretty. I am going to tap some on, but yeah, this looks pretty fine and doesn't look like it's really dissolving very much at all. Like, I'm not seeing, like where I press it down I see a bloom, but where I just put those speckles on, it does not seem to be spreading out. This reminds me a bit of when I used the color mist powder, because I didn't know if that would end up giving me any real pigment, and we ended up with nice sharp speckles. So here's the blue, and this is actually, I don't have the most control doing it like this, but so it will dissolve if I poke it, but I'm curious if we end up with speckles where we don't. I have been saving this project for a while now. The green looks a lot darker. Ooh, there it looks more limey, but it looks a little darker when it just first goes on. All right, we've got the yellow. This one is one of the ones I'm the most curious about, because the yellow in Kool-Aid is so pastel. You can barely, whoop, that was a lot. You can barely see it. Concentrated yellow food coloring tends to go a little more orange. Yeah, these powders are really fine. Really, really, and by fine I mean, you know, really tiny. Here's the orange. That is beautiful. If these speckles strike the way that we are sort of seeing them now, this will be really, really beautiful. Just because they are so fine, we're seeing like very, very discreet sort of clumps on there. The purple does feel very much like a grape color down there. Here's the red, which I don't think has any carmine in it. I think that it is just red 40 over there. So there's definitely enough acid in here for the food coloring to bind. And you know, there, with that warning saying it was very pigmented, there's definitely pigmentation here. Don't get me wrong at all, but it is not like, if this was acid dyes and I tapped this little bit, we would get bigger patches of color in each of these sections. So yeah, I am curious. All right, I'm starting to see some spread with the blue. I think that the powder, if I don't help it mix with the water, takes a little longer to absorb. So we're still on heat. We're on low heat, so we're not bubbling anymore. But I'm going to go ahead and let this go, I think 20 minutes. That might be a little too much time, but I want to give it a good amount of time in the heat to try to see if any of these speckles will set and stay as is. But first I will zoom in and show you what it all looks like. And here is the mask that I was using. I wasn't bothering with my respirator, but since I do so much yarn dyeing and I deal with so many different patterns, for me, I'd rather just be overly cautious, even with food safe powders. So the purple was one of the first colors we added, and you can see that those bits of the powder are still sitting on the surface. Again, very much like the Wilton Color Dust, which is also using the Lake food colorings. The black, there's a couple, but I don't think I dusted it as much. The blue, we're seeing this really pretty spread. I hope some of those specks will strike where they are. There's also a little bit of spread around some of the green. The yellow I'm not sure, like the specks are a little harder to see on there. There's our orange, and finally the red. So overall, there is definitely spread from these colors on the yarn, and we have really bright saturated hues. I'm very, very happy with the depth of color that we got from these powders on the yarn. But I'm going to be curious to see how much they do or do not spread out as time goes on. 20 minutes later, and the yarn feels almost unchanged from how it was when we left it. Let's see if these speckles are sort of staying or what. Aha. So here I am sort of messing with the yarn, and there are definitely some speckles that I can see that have stayed behind. They are not nearly that saturated as they were. And let me go up sort of on this green. The green actually, more of the green has stayed. Some of those really dark spots, you know, will dissolve a bit more when added with the water. And of course, blue, we know that the blue number 1 takes longer to absorb than a lot of these other colors. As for the red, yeah, I think that that darkness that we could see, same with the orange, like the sharpness of those specks is going sort of into the yarn. I think that if we were to steam set this, we might be able to maintain a little bit more. I'm going to do the yellow, which, poor yellow. I mean, you either look orange when you're really concentrated or not. Now this purple. And some of this purple was above the surface. I definitely see some breaking in here. Ooh, look at that red that's now spreading out. From both the purple and, I'm not sure if that was purple or black, there's definitely some breaking. I've got that purple color, but almost the blue has struck before that pink. That pink is spreading out more. And again, carmine, I guess, is actually red number 4. This is not something that I've used for dyeing before. And so really this is a variation on what we see with purple, where I almost have some blue speckles in here, some purples, and then this pink wash, which is really exciting. There's only a few little black kind of specks, and yeah, I mean, the intensity is going down a bit with water, but I would say this is pretty fun. So if this were Kool-Aid and we saw those sharp dots on the yarn, it would pretty much strike right away and stay there because there's the citric acid mixed in. And later on a future date, I will definitely play with this food coloring and mix in some citric acid to see what we can do. I am going to go, I think, and add more vinegar. Let's add, so that's 1 tablespoon, a 2nd tablespoon, and I'm actually going to move around the yarn. Sort of flip it over. We got some nice color penetration, but also keep in mind that we're using 1 skein of yarn, so it's really spread out here in the pan. I'm really, really into the color intensity that we see, and now I'm going to speed things up and add a bunch more color. I decided not to wait too long to see if we would get speckles here. I think that, you know, we have other experiments to do with this. We know speckles with food coloring are possible from Kool-Aid, so I think we just need to cut this. I mean, I suppose technically this is different food coloring because this is the lake form. The lake forms of food coloring involve using some kind of binder to some kind of metallic salt to make it insoluble, and then so then you can precipitate out the pigment and then use it in situations where water solubility might not be something that you want. Clearly we could dissolve these pigments back into water, and I just found out that all of the lake pigments, food coloring lake pigments, are approved in the US except for red number 3 lake, which is why I think we have carmine in that purple instead of red number 3. So you learn something new every day. I am really excited with the possibility of these pigments, with these dry pigments, and playing with techniques that we use with dry acid dye. I mean, certainly we could get something similar to this with liquid food coloring drops, but you would need to dilute it, and they likely each would spread further than what we're seeing here. So once in the low immersion setup we add this food coloring, it's staying basically where we put it. So we would be able to get, I think, a really cool, rather than this sort of semi-repeating setup that I've been dyeing today, I think that you could add little bits of this powdered food coloring all around the yarn to have sort of a topsy-turvy random rainbow, and they wouldn't spread out and blend together that much, only when you layer them on top of one another. And so that is useful. I'm going to let this sit for about 10 minutes and then we will flip and move things around again. But, okay, I'm still seeing hint. Yeah, most of the color has absorbed, only a hint is left. This is so pretty. I am really, really happy. Okay. Flipping it again just to get a sense of our depth of color coverage. It is very warm, so fair warning there. But yeah, even the blues have penetrated really nicely. I'm not seeing a ton of white patches or anything, and yeah, maybe just some hints of pink from these purples. I think the only two colors that I feel like I might want a little more of are a little bit more black and a little bit more purple. So I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera, and then I'm going to let this cool completely. I'll turn off the heat, we'll let it cool completely, and then we can wash it. Let's wash this yarn. I would say I'm overall pretty happy. I'm going to use a little bit of green dish soap on here, which maybe I should have used clear in case we're going to be concerned about any bleeding. But yeah, that's a little bit what I expected. Again, I haven't used cochineal or red number 4 for dyeing yarn. It is, you know, a natural pigment, and so I'm curious, like I'm seeing some brown in here, and I'm not sure if this is because we got some crossover with some orange, or if we had some color from the cochineal, which, you know, is supposed to give really beautiful pinks and reds. It is something that you can buy for dyeing yarn. I just haven't tried that yet. So I'm not sure how much washing you will need, but I will keep washing this until I can get the water to run clear and then hang it up to dry. Here is our really pretty yarn. There are some areas that definitely have a couple speckles, but overall it is way less speckled than I was expecting, especially when you consider the results that we got with the Wilton Color Dust that I believe also had lake food coloring in it. There we got really, really sharp speckles. However, the difference here is that we were using a low immersion technique versus steaming it in a steamer basket. And so maybe some of the powder was really floating versus coming into contact with the yarn in the system. So we're just staying on the surface because as soon as we tapped it, it would dissolve and go into the yarn. So I think that this would need to be played around with more on maybe a countertop and then steaming method. But I am thrilled with the potency of some of these colors. The yellow and the green and the blue are much more potent than what we see with Kool-Aid. And so those are just a lot of fun to play with. The red is definitely not as potent as what we see with Kool-Aid. I mean, some Kool-Aid flavors do sort of lean more pink, but it does feel more muted overall. And the purples as well, I think because they have carmine in them, I'll need to do some research about what conditions are best used to dye fiber with carmine, because that's absolutely, like cochineal is a natural dye that's used a lot for a bunch of reds. So there's definitely potential there in the future. I'm really impressed with the black. It's not super pigmented, but I'm also, I mean, okay, I see some hints of brown and blue in here. I'm not sure. That blue might come from the purple, and I don't know if there was some crossover with the orange, but we definitely have some gray shades here. And that's not usually something we have with food coloring. So who knows? Who knows? But maybe I should be playing with that on its own at some point in the future. I would like to give a huge shout out to the ChemKnits fan who sponsored this video today. Dyepot Weekly sponsors get a video designed just for them, taking their color preferences and yarn-based preferences into account, and the sponsors can get optional shout-outs in the video, plus at least 100 grams of yarn that I dyed in the video for them. And I think it's a lot of fun. Go check out the listing in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy store if you want to learn more about how you can sponsor one of these videos. If you don't need more yarn, I know, but if you don't need more yarn and you want to support us on a similar level, you can also go check out the ChemKnits Patreon. There are some really cool perks there, and you can get access to even more content. I'll have a link to that also in the video description and iCard. Thank you so much for watching, everyone.